Hey students, this is lesson 9.3, solving quadratic equations. What we're going to learn how to do is solve quadratic equations by graphing and using square roots. Go ahead and do the review here and I'll check back with you. All right, so we already talked about this a little bit, what the standard form of a quadratic equation is. And a quadratic equation can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and that's called the standard form. So we replace the y with the 0. And then here's a couple of examples. Go ahead and do in number 7 and 8, and you can check back with your answers. All right, you can solve quadratic equations by a variety of methods. One way to solve a quadratic equation is to graph the related function and find the solutions on the graph. And that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to use my calculator so you'll see how to do this, and then when you do it on your own, you'll actually make the graph. But for function A here, we want to know when x squared minus 16 equals 0. Okay? And some of you are thinking, well, that's easy, that's 4, right? So let's graph it and just see that. So, and the way we're going to graph it is we're just going to graph y equals x squared minus 16, and then we're going to look for an output of 0. All right, and now to graph it, I'm going to zoom. There's a thing called zoom fit, and I think that's a good zoom to use to get a pretty good picture of the graph as it is. Okay. Now, one thing about this, I have to be able to see where it's crossing the x-axis, and right now, I think the x-axis is right at the top of this window, which is at my y. I need y to equal 0 in order to use this. So I'm going to go from negative 16 to 2 and just regraph this. Okay, and also I'm going to change my x. I need to see where it actually crosses it, so I'm going to change that from negative 5 to 5. Okay. All right, now I can see that, and here's what I'm looking for. Right here, y equals 0, right here on the graph. So here's my solutions right there. The function equals 0 at those two spots, so I just have to figure out what those are. Now, my scale was a half, so that's negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. And I know that those answers are exactly right because negative 4 times negative 4 is 16, and 16 minus 16 is 0. So my two solutions are, for this one, x equals negative 4, or x can equal 4, and it solves that. Okay, the second graph, the quantity x minus 2 squared equals 0. Let's go ahead and graph that. So we're just graphing the function again, not equals 0. All right, I'm just going to try a standard window on this, see what happens. That's zoom 6. Okay, so on this one, we want to find the point where it's touching the axis, and to me it looks like 2 right there, so I'm just going to check that. And if I do 2 minus 2, I get 0 squared is 0, and I don't see any place else where it's crossing the x-axis, so, or the y-axis, the x-axis, where y is equal to 0. So in this problem, so x is equal to just 2 in this one. And notice, you might think negative 2, but negative 2 minus 2 is actually -4, and -4 squared is not equal to 0. So, and then the last one, x squared plus 10 equals 0. Let's put that into our calculator. Y equals squared plus 10. All right, so graph that. And notice that thing doesn't even show up on the graph. So I'm just going to zoom it out once and just see where that thing is. And there it is. Notice that it never gets to y equals 0 here, which means there is no solution for this. There's no number multiplied by itself and then add 10 to it that equals 0. That kind of makes sense because these numbers are always positive, right? And if you added 10, you never get 0. Okay? So I'm going to let you try that, and I'll check back with you. All right, another way we can do is just solve it by undoing the equation. And so, and we're going to just use some of the strategies we used to use, like to solve this, first thing I might want to do is just add 45 to both sides. All right, and then I get 5x squared is equal to 45. Then I'm thinking I might want to divide by 5, and that gives me x squared equals 9. And at this point, you could probably tell what the answers are, but and they're plus or minus 3. And you get that by finding, by taking the positive and negative square root of both of these. And we get plus or minus 3 for the answer. Okay, so there's 2 solutions to that. Go ahead, you try that. All right, so let's put these ideas to work, solve the problem here. It says the length of a rectangular prism is 3 times its width. So let's just draw a little rectangular prism here. And its length is 3 times its width. So we could do something like that. If the volume, and the height is 5, so we'll label that 5. If the volume of the prism is 80 cubic inches, what is the length of the prism round to the nearest tenth of an inch? Well, remember, volume is length times width times height. And in this case, I can substitute for the volume. It tells us that volume is 80. I'm going to substitute 80 for that. And for the length, I'm going to substitute 3w. For the width, I'm just going to use w. And for the height, I'm going to use 5. I'm just going to simplify that. 3 times 5 is 15 w squared. Okay, now I'm going to divide both sides by 15. And that gives me, I'm just going to simplify this as a fraction, see how that works out. 5 goes into 80 16 times, and 5 goes into 15 3 times. So w squared is equal to 16 thirds. And then I'm going to do the square root of both sides. Now remember, there's a positive and a negative, but I'm really only interested in the positive square root. So square root of 16 thirds. And at this point, I'm going to have to approximate that on my calculator. And so I'm going to do square root of 16 divided by 3. Enter, about 2.3. W is approximately 2.3. All right. We want to know the length, so I got to multiply that by 3, which gives me about 6.9. Let's just check that to make sure on the calculator. So rounding to the nearest 10th, 6.9 is the correct answer. All right, you try that. I'll check back with you. All right, that's it for the lesson. Go ahead and do the lesson check, and I'll check back with you on this tomorrow.